The afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Henderson's general store, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors. Tom Rivers stood in the produce aisle, carefully selecting apples for his daughter Emma's lunchboxes. At 42, he'd grown accustomed to these small routines, the quiet tasks of single parenthood that had become his life after his wife passed 3 years ago. He was reaching for a bag of oranges when he heard the commotion near the front of the store. "I saw you slip that chocolate bar into your pocket." Mrs. Henderson's voice carried through the store, sharp and accusing. Tom looked up to see a young girl in a wheelchair, perhaps 12 or 13 years old, her face flushed with embarrassment and tears beginning to well in her eyes. She wore a simple dress that had seen better days, and her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. The wheelchair was old, its chrome dulled with age. "I didn't take anything," the girl said quietly, her voice trembling. "Please, I didn't." Mrs. Henderson stood over her, arms crossed, her expression hard. "Don't lie to me, child. I've been running this store for 30 years. I know a thief when I see one." A small crowd had begun to gather. Tom noticed how some people looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Others whispered to each other, their eyes filled with judgment. The girl sat there, her hands gripping the armrests of her wheelchair, her whole body seeming to shrink under the weight of the accusation. Tom saw something in her face that reminded him of his own daughter. That same vulnerability, that same desperate need to be believed, to be seen as good. He set down his basket and walked toward them slowly. "Excuse me," Tom said gently, approaching Mrs. Henderson. "I couldn't help but overhear. Did you actually see her take something, or did you just assume?" Mrs. Henderson turned to him, her jaw set firmly. "I know what I saw, Tom Rivers. These kids come in here thinking they can take advantage of an old woman." "But did you see it?" Tom asked again, keeping his voice calm. "With your own eyes?" The store owner hesitated just for a moment. "Well, I saw her hand near the candy display, and then she moved it quickly. I know suspicious behavior when I see it." Tom knelt down beside the girl's wheelchair, meeting her eyes. They were brown and frightened, filled with tears that hadn't yet fallen. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Sophie," she whispered. "Sophie Martinez." "Sophie, I'm Tom. Would you mind if I checked your pockets, just so we can clear this up?" The girl nodded, her relief visible. "Please. I promise I didn't take anything." Tom gently checked the pockets of her dress, then the small bag hanging from the back of her wheelchair. Nothing. He turned to Mrs. Henderson. "There's nothing here. She could have dropped it when she saw me coming," the store owner insisted, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "Or maybe," Tom said quietly, standing up, "maybe she didn't take anything at all. Maybe we're so quick to judge people based on how they look or what we think we know about them that we forget they're human beings with dignity. Just like us." The words hung in the air. Tom saw Mrs. Henderson's face soften slightly, saw the shame creep into her eyes. An older man stepped forward from the small crowd, distinguished-looking, with silver hair and kind eyes. He'd been standing near the back, watching everything unfold. "I was standing right by the candy display," he said clearly. "I saw the whole thing. This young lady didn't take anything. She was looking at the prices, and when she reached up to see the tag better, her hand bumped the display. That's all that happened." Mrs. Henderson's face went pale. She looked at Sophie, really looked at her, and Tom could see the moment her heart began to change. I'm so sorry," she said, her voice thick with regret. "Sophie, I apologize. I made an awful assumption. That was wrong of me." Sophie nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's okay," she said softly, though Tom could hear it wasn't quite okay, not yet. "No," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "It's not okay. I was unkind, and that's something I need to make right." She disappeared behind the counter for a moment, then returned with a small box of chocolates, the good kind she usually kept locked up. "Please, take these, and I hope you'll forgive an old woman her mistakes." Sophie accepted the chocolates with a small, grateful smile. The silver-haired man approached them as the crowd dispersed. Up close, Tom noticed the quality of his suit, the expensive watch on his wrist. But more than that, he noticed the way the man looked at Sophie, with a depth of emotion that spoke of something more than a stranger's concern. "Thank you," the man said to Tom, extending his hand. "I'm Richard Martinez, Sophie's father." Tom shook his hand, feeling the pieces click into place. "Tom Rivers, I'm glad I could help." "You did more than help," Richard said quietly. "You gave my daughter back her dignity. That's not something I can easily repay." Sophie wheeled herself closer to her father. "Dad was letting me shop by myself for the first time," she explained. "He was waiting outside, giving me space to be independent." Richard placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "After the accident 2 years ago, Sophie has worked so hard to do things on her own. I try to give her that freedom when I can, but I'm always nearby. When I saw what was happening through the window, I wanted to rush in immediately, but I could see you were already there, helping her." "Any decent person would have done the same," Tom said. "You'd be surprised," Richard replied, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "Most people looked away. You stepped forward. That takes character." Tom felt uncomfortable with the praise. "I just thought about my own daughter. Emma's 11. I'd want someone to stand up for her." "You're raising her alone?" Richard asked gently. Tom nodded. "My wife passed 3 years ago. Cancer. It's been just the two of us since then." Something shifted in Richard's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or shared understanding of loss. "I'm sorry. That must be incredibly difficult." "We manage," Tom said. "She's a good kid. Makes it easier." Sophie spoke up then, her voice stronger now. "Would Emma like to come over sometime? I don't have many friends. Most kids at school, they see the wheelchair first." Tom saw the hope in her eyes, the loneliness beneath it, and his heart ached. "I think Emma would love that. She's been feeling a bit lonely herself lately. Her best friend moved away last month." Richard reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "Please call me. We live just outside town, on Maple Ridge. There's plenty of space for the girls to play, and—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I'd like to thank you properly. Perhaps you and Emma could join us for dinner this weekend?" Tom took the card, reading it. "Richard Martinez, CEO, Martinez Technologies." He looked up, surprised, but Richard's expression remained open and genuine. "You don't need to thank me," Tom said. "Really, I know I don't need to," Richard replied. "But I'd like to. Sometimes it's important to acknowledge kindness when we encounter it. There's too little of it in the world." That Saturday evening, Tom drove his old sedan up the winding drive to the Martinez estate, Emma beside him in her Sunday dress, chattering nervously. When the house came into view, Emma's eyes went wide. "Dad," she whispered, "they're rich." "Money doesn't matter, Em," Tom said gently. "They're just people, like us. Sophie seems like a really nice girl." Richard greeted them at the door himself, dressed casually in khakis and a sweater. The warmth in his welcome immediately put them at ease. Sophie was waiting just inside, and within minutes the two girls were wheeling down the hallway together, Emma walking beside Sophie's chair, already deep in conversation. Richard led Tom through the beautiful home to a comfortable study lined with books. He poured 2 glasses of lemonade. Not wine, Tom noticed, perhaps because he'd observed Tom's simple clothing and made an assumption about his preferences, or perhaps simply because it was early evening. "I want to be honest with you," Richard said as they settled into comfortable chairs. "After the accident, after my wife died giving birth to our son, he didn't survive either. I became very protective of Sophie, sometimes too protective. I've tried to give her everything, the best doctors, the best therapies, the best schools, but what I can't give her is something you gave her freely in that store." "What's that?" Tom asked. "Respect," Richard said simply. "You treated her like a person, not a problem or a charity case. You stood up for her not because you pitied her, but because it was right." Tom looked down at his glass. "I've learned a lot about respect in the past 3 years. When Sarah died, people treated me differently. Some were kind, but others, they acted like I was broken, or like Emma and I were objects of pity. I hated that, so I understand, a little bit, what Sophie must feel sometimes." They talked for a long time, these two fathers from different worlds. Richard spoke about the loneliness of wealth, how people treated him differently because of his money, how he never quite knew who his real friends were. Tom shared the challenges of making ends meet on a teacher's salary, the way he'd had to become both mother and father to Emma, learning to braid hair and talk about things he never imagined he'd need to understand. "I built my company from nothing," Richard said. "I grew up poor, poorer than you might imagine. My mother cleaned houses, my father worked construction. Everything I have, I earned. But somewhere along the way, I forgot what it was like." "That's what you reminded me of in the store." The girls appeared in the doorway, faces flushed with laughter. "Dad," Sophie called out, "can Emma stay for dinner, please?" Richard looked at Tom, who nodded. "We'd be honored." Dinner was a revelation. Richard's housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, had prepared a wonderful meal, but what struck Tom most was how normal it felt. They sat around the kitchen table, not the formal dining room, and Richard served the food himself. The conversation flowed easily. Emma and Sophie talking about their favorite books, sharing stories about school, laughing about silly things. Tom watched his daughter's face light up in a way he hadn't seen since before Sarah died. It made his heart both ache and soar. After dinner, as they prepared to leave, Richard walked them to the door. "Tom," he said quietly, while the girls said their goodbyes, "I have a proposition for you. I'm looking for someone to head up our company's community outreach program. Someone who understands real people, real problems, someone with character. The salary would be substantial, and it would allow you to make a real difference in people's lives." Tom was stunned. "Richard, I'm a teacher. I don't know anything about corporate outreach. You know the most important thing," Richard replied. "You know how to see people, truly see them. That's rarer than you think. At least think about it." Tom drove home in silence, his mind spinning. Emma had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, a smile still on her face. Over the following weeks, the four of them spent more time together. Tom and Richard discovered a genuine friendship, one built not on obligation or gratitude, but on mutual respect and shared values. Emma and Sophie became inseparable, the wheelchair just another part of who Sophie was, no more remarkable to Emma than the color of her hair. Tom eventually accepted Richard's offer, though not without careful thought. It wasn't about the money, though he couldn't deny that financial security would ease many of his worries. It was about the opportunity to help others the way he'd helped Sophie, to create programs that gave people dignity, that saw them as individuals, not categories or statistics. On Tom's first day at Martinez Technologies, Richard called him into his office. "I want to show you something," Richard said, pulling out an old, worn photograph. It showed a young Hispanic couple with a small boy. "That's my parents, and me at age 8. 3 months after this photo was taken, we were shopping for school supplies. My mother was accused of stealing, just like Sophie was. The store owner called the police. It was humiliating, terrifying. They eventually let her go. She hadn't taken anything, but the damage was done. I never forgot how people looked at us, how they assumed the worst because we were poor, because we didn't look like we belonged." He set the photo down gently. "That day in Henderson's store, when I saw Sophie facing the same thing, I felt that old helplessness again. But then you stepped in. You changed the story. You gave it a different ending. That's what I want us to do here. Change endings, give people better stories." Tom understood then that this wasn't just a job. It was a calling, a chance to pass on the kindness that had always guided him. Years passed. The friendship between the two families deepened and grew. Emma and Sophie went to the same high school, then the same college. They supported each other through everything. Emma's first heartbreak